Zoom. Okay, so I'm going to jump to the outline. We're going to do soil basics today. We'll get into organic matters and fertilizers. This includes manure, compost, cover crops, and leaf litter. Our last part will be on soil tests, those that are fee related, and also those that I call free, those free soil tests that you could do in the backyard setting. I'll also get into how to read a soil test with some of the ways that I have utilized in the past to help you kind of learn to do that. You will have my email and my phone number today, and this will be something that you could use if you decide to get a soil test. You could email me your results, and we could talk a little bit more about what your soil test results show. Let's get a definition started. To me, I find that soil is organic matter that's always changing. It's recycling products, it's releasing nutrients for plant uptake. It's always changing. I think that's really important to recognize, is that the soil that you're growing in, the soil you may be growing in, or the soil that you might be bringing in and kind of modifying in a growing area is always being modified and changed based on the environment, based on what you're growing, and sometimes based on what you're not doing to it. It's being modified, it's being altered. As much as we use the term dirt to get you here today, we're going to stop using the term dirt. Dirt is misplaced soil. It's lost its home, it's lost its way. Start respecting your soil by stop using the term dirt. And I will try my hardest to not use the term dirt as we go along today too. There's a greater shift in understanding the soil with a focus on healthy soils that will equal healthy plants. What I mean by this term is that if you are managing your soil properly, if you're adding good organic matter like a compost, manure, or leaf litter, if you are crop rotating, if you are keeping the soil covered, if you're keeping that soil pH maintained, does not matter what plants you put in and grow, you should have them be healthy. That's kind of the idea there. And there's a lot more to think about that idea, but I do want us to kind of think more about that practice and that management style. Soil is influenced by practices, the parent material, the weather, the time, and so forth. The chart you see here, this pie chart, shows kind of the breakdown of your soil. So it is air, it is water comprising 25%, minerals being 45%, and then organic matter of 5%. As we talk about soil, we need to recognize that plants play a very large role in the productivity of your soil. Certainly when I plant a plant or I have an established tree or shrub, it's taking up nutrients. It also is contributing to the microbial community. And that's something I'm going to reiterate again today and talk more about, is this microbial community, how fascinating it is, but also what a job it's doing when it comes to helping your plants out. Plants may add leaf litter, they could add organic matter, both of which we'll talk more about today. They also give exudates to microbes. So the plants around the roots are covered with funguses and bacteria, lots of these great, good microbial communities. And the fungus and the bacteria are not attacking the roots, but they're getting sugars, they're getting food off of these roots from the plants. Annual, perennial plants will play a much greater role as well. When we compare an annual soil to a perennial soil, there can be some differences. If we think about the annual soil and we think about an annual plant, there is that yearly disturbance. This means that that soil community needs to get rebuilt. The soil community being the bacteria, the fungus, the earthworms, and so forth. You're taking a root system out on a yearly basis. You're bringing a new root system in every year. And that means that the soil microbial communities need to adapt and they need to rebuild themselves up. There also can be an addition of organic matter on a yearly basis. From a vegetable approach, this may be that you add a bag of compost every year, or you add straw or leaf litter to the soil every year. There also can be that you're leaving roots behind, and leaving these roots behind is where a lot of it is shifting to practice. There is more encouragement to leave the roots behind of an annual plant, meaning that if you're growing vegetables this summer and the vegetable season is over with, you may decide to remove the top part of the plant and leave the roots behind so that the roots will break down, they will be eaten by the microbial communities, and they will add to the overall soil health that you're after. More to come on that principle. Undisturbed soil is without that yearly disturbance. You have a greater buildup of soil microbial communities, so great funguses, bacteria, nematodes, all of those interesting interlocking soil biological parts are being built up. We find the nutrient cycle stays fairly closed, and we also start to see that there may be similarities to other ecosystems, such as a forest soil or prairie soil. It won't necessarily get there fully. However, having the root systems in place, your trees, your shrubs, your perennial plants in place within the soil is keeping that nutrient cycle closed and microbial community closed. You're going to hear a lot today about organic matter. And what I want to reiterate is that when you add a compost, you add a manure, you add leaf litter, those are organic matters. And when those organic matters break down, they will be added to the overall soil organic matter, the SOM. Most soils contain 1 to 6% of the SOM. So when you get a soil test, which you see in this photo, the organic matter measurement listed here of 4% is the soil organic matter. The reason we get very concerned with it is that it does contain 95% of my soil nitrogen and 40% of my soil phosphorus. A definition for soil organic matter: it's a chemical union between the humus and the clay particles. In most cases, and in essence, it makes the soil easier to work with. It makes it more resistant to compaction that you may run into. So soil organic matter can address soil aeration and water infiltration. It can improve both of those. It can also improve the water holding capacity of your soil. And it also allows your soil to be resistant to pH changes that may be occurring. Soil organic matter provides food for our microbial communities. It also enhances pore spaces. Pore spaces is how my actual soil particles fit together. If I was to take a soil sample, look at it under a microscope, I would see how those individual soil particles fit together. Within that percentage, say of 1 to 6% of the overall soil organic matter, it is further broken up by stable organic matter, decomposing organic matter, fresh residues, and living organisms. Decomposing organic matter is organic matter that you added potentially 2 to 3 years ago. So if you added, say, compost or manure in the summer of 2018, it would still be decomposing and we would still have it be considered an active fraction, that 33 to 50% of that 1 to 6%. Our living organisms, our microbes, are less than 5% of that 1 to 6%. We'll talk a bit more about this today. Is organic matter soil organic matter? Yes, kinda, sorta. When you add to the soil a compost, a manure, leaf litter, or cover crops, it will be broken down into the soil. And over time, it will eventually enter that soil organic matter percentage. This can sometimes take decades. The compost that you added in the summer of 2019 may still be breaking down in 2029. It's a very long game. And we still want you to be adding organic matter and still be thinking of what can be added to the soil, but recognize that it can take some time. So that active organic matter is less than 5 years. And it's with the end goal that it will become stable organic matter, which could take decades here. It's a very imperfect situation. You are encouraged to add organic matter like compost, manure, leaf litter, and so forth, depending on your growing situation. And yet it can be lost to the atmosphere. It may not break down as much as we want it to. There are numerous factors involved in this, and very much environmental factors that are involved in this as well. I want you to recognize that though. If you get a soil test and the soil test comes back and says that your soil organic matter is 3%, just know that that percent is something that you have been working towards for quite some time. We'll talk more about this. So to reiterate, organic matter will eventually add to the soil organic matter, but it can take years and decades to get there. There are 3 fractions within this. That's the living plant animal, it's the dead plant animal, and it's the humus, decayed, unrecognized, not food for organisms, holds many of the stable plant nutrients of nitrogen and phosphorus that we need. When you add an organic matter, it will be broken down as living in most cases, and then furthermore will be broken down as dead and furthermore as humus. Some home and garden centers will sell what's called humus. You will see bags of humus. You will see the ability to actually bring in humus and add to the soil. Know that the humus that is being sold is basically compost. It is not that it is the humus that's in the actual soil. It is being classified as compost. If you were to purchase the humus and add it to the soil, just know that it's compost and it needs to be broken down. It's not going to go straight to the soil organic matter. So every organic matter may have different compounds. When I add compost, manure, cover crops, or leaf litter, like as an organic matter, it could have fresh organic residues, it could have sugars, starches, proteins, it could have lignins, fats, and waxes. Lignins being more of that woody plant material that can be pretty common with some of our bark and other wood chips. If it's a fresh organic residue, it breaks down pretty well and very fast under favorable conditions. These favorable conditions tend to be very warm soil and warm weather. That tends to be where they break down really well. And it is energy for the soil microbes. The microbes are being fed. They love that you're providing them with food. Manure and some other organic matters will have sugars, starches, and proteins. Yet again, it also is good energy for the soil microbes. You will have some organic matters with lignins, fats, and waxes, and these are resistant to decomposition. The microbes don't want them, or they may have some of them, but don't eat or decompose a lot of them, and they would tend to go straight to the humus. This does not mean that you should just be adding those that are not feeding your microbes. In fact, you want to steer more towards the fresh ones than the ones that are the lignins, fats, and waxes. But just to recognize that sometimes your products will have that. The soil food web is what is occurring in the soil. And this is occurring throughout the season, depending on what you're growing, but also, if there was no plants there as well, the soil food web would be very active. If you look at this photo and think more towards the left where our plants are, you will see that roots and shoots of the plants are covered with microbial communities of funguses and bacteria. If you were to add an organic matter, this also would start to increase the funguses and bacteria decomposition as well. You're feeding them and they kind of start that first wave of decomposition. As fungus and bacteria increase and reproduce, they are then eaten by bigger predators. And as those predators increase and reproduce, they are eaten by other predators as well. And this cycle is occurring. We'll talk more about this too. In essence, it's a transfer of energy by breaking down organic matter. Populations have a role, and they're very interdependent in this system where the microbial community is very active and being eaten. Macrofauna would be those that you could actually see, such as worms or arthropods. Microfauna would be bacteria, actinomycetes, which is a multicellular bacteria, algae, fungi, and nematodes. You need both these groups, and you will find a much more activity in most cases with the microfauna because they will just be covering the root systems of the plants you're growing. One of the questions I get when I teach this course, as well as with Master Gardener trainings and the work that I do with homeowners, is a question of when should I actually be adding compost, manure, or my other organic matter that season. In most cases, we find that there is a peak of bacterial and fungal activity right a little bit before early summer. What this means is that they are starting to break down organic matter already in the soil. They're starting to reproduce. They're starting to get eaten. If you were to add an organic matter around this time, this would be the time to do it. You would be feeding your microbial community, if you will, and getting them active and ready to go for the season. For Northern Illinois, this tends to be around the end of April. And I use this as a thought that our last spring frost will be mid-May, end of May. So by adding at the end of April, you will find that they will be ready to go when you actually plant your summer vegetable garden this season. So a good month before planting is what I tend to recommend. I want to mention soil chemistry. I know that this can be a very painful topic to discuss, but I do want to stress soil chemistry here because you will find that it can be something that will limit your plant growth. It could also ensure that you have the best plants that you can grow that season too. Definition is the measure of hydrogen ion concentration in soil, and it affects the availability of nutrients to be taken up by the plant. When we discuss an acidic soil, we're talking about soil that's less than 7. If it is a soil pH of 7, this is considered neutral, and anything above 7 is considered alkaline. Most vegetables and fruit thrive in a soil pH of 6 to 7. You are able to go higher than this just slightly. Potentially, you could go to about 7.3, 7.4. You could also go a little bit lower than 6 and be comfortable as well. Shrubs, trees, flowers also tend to thrive in the 6 to 7.0 zone. You may have certain fruits and vegetables that are a little more demanding in their soil pH. Blueberry is one of the main examples that we think about when it comes to their acidity needs. They need an acidity less than 5. In most cases, a soil test will determine whether to raise or lower the pH. It's important to realize that to raise a pH, typically we are recommending lime before planting, and that it could take 3 to 6 months to actually have a change in that soil pH. Because of where we are currently at in April, you may find that you don't have enough time to alter the soil pH for summer vegetable planting. To lower pH, we typically recommend elemental sulfur. I think it's important when we discuss altering the soil pH to recognize that it may take time and you could be better off adapting. What I mean here is that you may find that based on the soil pH, you may decide to use a raised bed and grow in a different growing media. Or you may decide to grow a different vegetable or a different fruit tree based on the soil pH being as it is, whether it's too acidic in most cases. So this could be something to consider. As far as maintaining the soil pH, once you have it established or you feel really comfortable with it, I would encourage you to use crop rotation. Make sure that you are applying fertilizer rates correctly and addressing your crop needs. If you are adding manure and other organic matters, you will find that that can also maintain the soil pH. These practices can ensure that your soil pH is being maintained and the change that may be happening on it may be just slightly. The connection between soil pH and the soil nutrients is where the concern is with maintaining soil pH. You can see at the bottom of the screen the soil pH range, which is measuring from 4 to 10. And then you see in the middle of this image all of the soil nutrients that your plants need to take up during that growing season. You also note that in this image, they have put an optimum soil pH range of 6.2 to 7.3. And what this means is that if I'm staying within the right pH range for my crops and the nutrients are available, my plants will be able to take up these nutrients. If I go too high or I go too low and it's not within the right soil pH range for my crops, it may mean that I am not able to take up a plant nutrient that was available in the soil, or it may mean that I take up too much of what I need. Our macronutrients of nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium are the top three that you see there. But certainly recognize our secondary nutrients, sulfur, calcium, magnesium, as well as our micronutrients are also needed by the plants too. One of the ways that I think about this is that every soil tends to like a door. And every vegetable, every fruit tree has a door that it's after. This is an image of 2 peach trees that I received this week and will be planting. The peach trees need a soil pH of 6.5 to 7.0. If I am planning to plant in a soil and I measure that soil pH and the soil pH is 5.5, even if all of those nutrients were available in the soil, because the door and the soil isn't correct when it comes to the plants that I'm going to be growing, it does not matter. If that door was a 6.5 to 7 and all the nutrients were available to me in the soil, then that door and the soil would swing open. And depending on what my tree needed during that time, they would be able to take up those nutrients. But you have to have the right door and you have to have the right soil in order for your plants to take up those nutrients. It doesn't matter if you keep adding fertilizers and other nutrients over and over again to your soil. If the soil pH is incorrect, the plants are not going to be able to take up those nutrients. So let's talk about management, what we're going to do today as far as adding to the soil and also making sure that our soil is performing at the level it needs to. So recognize that each plant species has a set nutrient need throughout the growing season. And this is at the start when you are planting the plant. This can be at flowering. This is also at fruiting. Throughout the season, they have nutrient needs. All of those macronutrients, secondary nutrients, and micronutrients. For proper yields, the plants must get what they need during the growing season and during that time. It's important to recognize that organic matter may not fully address the seasonal need. So as much as we are going to encourage you to add compost, manure, cover crops, leaf litter, and other products that will break down to the soil, you need to recognize that they may not provide enough nutrients for the plants that season. I tend to think it's important to think about needing a fertilizer and an organic matter on a seasonal basis, combining that with other information you know about your growing area too. But I think that that's something to think about is this season you need to decide on your fertilizer and you also need to decide on organic matter. We'll get more into solutions as we go along today. So applying these soil amendments, that's where we're classifying them right now. Applying a fertilizer, nutrients are released, they're taken up by the plants. They could be leached out of the system and not available to the plants. The nutrients could also be tied up in the soil solution. They could be locked in the particles of the soil, unable for my plants to actually take them up. If I am applying organic matters, nutrients are released through competition over resources from the soil biological community. So I depend highly on soil biology in order for these organic matters to break down. There are great long-term benefits to your healthy soil with the addition of organic matters. It's important to recognize that many of them are very low in nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, the NPK that you see here. You're encouraged to use both. Annuals, this could be almost every year. For perennials, certainly when needed based on your fertilizers, and maybe every 2 years or more for problems when it comes to adding organic matter. You could be growing a perennial plant that has a mulch layer in place, and that is an organic matter that will break down over some time. So in your situation, it may be that you pull back that mulch layer and maybe you put a little bit of compost around that plant to add, because it's a little bit of a different organic matter. This is the nitrogen cycle. I just want to kind of show you what this looks like so you can kind of understand kind of where nitrogen and how nitrogen is taken up by the plant. I've placed in here blue stars. So yes, on a seasonal basis, the soil organic matter could be breaking down and releasing nitrogen for your plants to uptake. At the same time, you see NO3 there is one of my other blue stars. That could be provided by a nitrogen fertilizer. And because it's in the right chemical formula, if my plant needs it, and when my plant needs it, they could take up that NO3. So it does not have to depend on the soil biological process. It's already in the right chemical formula. It enters that nitrogen cycle, and when my plant needs it, it can be taken up. On the opposite side then is our soil biological communities. So they are, as mentioned to you, covering the root systems of the plants that I'm growing. They are breaking down organic matters that are being added that season, as well as those that have been added in previous season. They are reproducing, they are thriving if the soil is warm, if the air temperatures are warm. And what's happening here is that as the bacteria reproduce, and they are happy in this image here, they will get eaten by bigger predators in that soil food web. And in this situation, they are being eaten by a nematode. When this nematode eats the bacteria, it will excrete. And it is this excretion that has nitrogen. And depending on what formula and format that nitrogen excretion is in, it can then be taken up by the plant, or it will enter that nitrogen cycle. Whenever you add an organic matter, it has to go through this process of being broken down, of them reproducing, of them getting eaten, and of them excreting. At this stage, I don't worry too much about the C to N ratios that you see here. You see C to N of 5:1 and a C to N of 10:1. I wouldn't worry too much about that. But I just want you to see that when it comes to organic matters you're adding to the soil, it is the excretion that is eventually releasing nitrogen for my plants to uptake. A standard fertilizer will list NPK on the bag. For instance, if I purchase a fertilizer and it says 555, it means that there are 5 parts of nitrogen, 5 parts of phosphorus, and 5 parts of potassium within that many pounds of that fertilizer. In this situation, it's a ratio of 1:1:1. You hear a lot of times in extension, we recommend a vegetable garden as a 10:10:10. This is a balanced fertilizer, meaning that you have an equal amount of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, our 3 main macronutrients that our plants need. Try to match your fertility needs with a fertilizer. You may find you have to get as close as you can for this. I encourage you to read the directions. I know that this is something that you're aware of and you know, and yet we just need to further reiterate this. You may find that fertilizers will say that you will just apply this once a season. It could be the fertilizer says you should apply this every month. There may be a fertilizer that you choose that you will find that you need to apply it every 2 weeks. So it depends highly on that fertilizer. A further question is how many pounds may you need to apply for a certain growing area? I encourage you to look at directions for that rate. It's very hard for me to make a large sweeping recommendation because fertilizers are just very different when it comes to the rate of application. Recognize that animal, plant-based fertilizers are not always in the right chemical form. So it may take time for them to be released and move into that nutrient cycle. A fertilizer such as blood meal or bone meal, you will look on the back of that fertilizer and you will see that it just says nitrogen. And so it is something that it needs to be broken down through the soil biological communities to be added to that nutrient cycle. It's just not yet in that chemical formula. I have a couple of examples of fertilizers we'll look at on the next slide to kind of let you see what these look like. What if you can't find the right fertilizer? Maybe it's a lower NPK than I need. That was the only one you were able to find. You may need to do some math conversions to actually get the right rate to this. What if it is that you found a fertilizer, but maybe you need to double the NPK I need? In most cases, you could double. If I only had a fertilizer that was a 5-5-5, I could apply this twice and get that 10-10-10 that I'm after just applied once. What if you have a fertilizer and you need more potassium, but not nitrogen? Try to find lower ones if need be. I recognize when I look at fertilizers at home and garden centers that there's a wide range of fertilizers out there. If you have the time and the ability to do some research before purchasing these, I think it's going to be very crucial in finding fertilizers that work for you. Here are a couple of fertilizers that I have myself. In extension, we do not endorse any fertilizers over another. These are just mentioned as some examples for you. Reading the label is very crucial here when it comes to choosing and using fertilizers. You will find a lot of information on the side when it comes to what the analysis is. This is Osmocote, so it is 15, 9, and 12 within 15 of nitrogen, 9 of phosphorus, and 12 of potassium. What I want you to see is that when you look at this label, you see mention nitrate nitrogen and monomical nitrogen. Both of these mean that it is already in the right chemical formula to be added to that nitrogen cycle that you saw on our previous slide. It also is already in phosphate, it already is in potash. What this also means yet again is that these are already in the right chemical formulas. So they can be added to the soil, they can enter that nutrient cycle that each of them has, and then from there, when the plants need it, it can be taken up. The direction on this was a cupful per 2 gallons of water. If you've purchased Osmocote before, you know it has its own cap on the top, and then you pour it into that cap. And then from there, you could apply it with 2 gallons of water. This is for a 4 square foot area is the application rate. And you're applying this every 6 months. So it's a very slow release process for outdoor vegetables within it. Osmocote is also known for having a lot of other nutrients available for the plants. So these are micronutrients. These are also some of your secondary nutrients too. What about Miracle-Gro? A very common one that folks ask questions about as well. This is the 12, 4, and 8 within this. These the NPK values. You see on the back, it is urea. It also is phosphate, and this is potash as well. Already in the right chemical formulas and the ability to then be added to the soil. Know that the Miracle-Gro that I have here may not be what your Miracle-Gro is. This is one that is already in a liquid formula within it. For this one, I need to do 4 teaspoons in 2 gallons of water for a 20 square foot area of a garden. And the kicker here is that I need to apply this every 7 to 14 days. Compared to say Osmocote that was going to be applied once every 6 months, Miracle-Gro is suggesting I apply this every 7 to 14 days. When you see the directions that discuss the application rate, it's important to recognize that the application rate that they are recommending is the expectation that the plants will absorb all of those nutrients within that period of time. Or it's a nutrient that may become locked in to that soil nutrient cycle. But it is that whatever that rate and application, that's the expectation that those nutrients should be absorbed by the plant during that period of time. That's why you see 7 to 14 days for Miracle-Gro versus 6 months for your Awesome Coat. What about tree fertility then? It's very important for trees and any other perennial plants. You need to know the soil pH, and you also want to consider what those other nutrients are before planting. If you have an established orchard in the backyard, if you have other trees and other shrubs and perennials that you're growing, you don't need a yearly fertility plan unless you're seeing less than 6 inches of growth. If it's new growth in a present year, and this is a calendar year, and it's greater than 6 inches, there's no need for it. If you see any yellowing or off color, perhaps you may fertilize based on that as well. However, I still encourage you to recognize that there could be environmental conditions that are resulting in the yellowing and off color of some of your perennial plants. Do not immediately think that this is a growth issue, that it needs fertility and needs a fertilizer. Recognize that there could be some environmental issues occurring too. You will find a number of different types. This includes liquid, granular. Both of these are better. Granular tends to be a little bit better because you're able to then scatter it around the tree itself. We do not recommend the spikes. A spike is one that has the actual fertilizer in it. The directions for spikes is you will create kind of a circle around your tree and your shrub. The issue with the spikes is that the roots of those perennial plants will grow towards those spikes. Versus if I was to use a liquid or a granular and I am mixing it in uniformly and then moving that around the trees and the other shrubs themselves, it's a much more equal distribution. That's a brief overview of your fertilizers. We'll get into organic matter now next. These are products that benefit the soil with very low nutrients. They allow for your soils to be more productive. When individuals call our extension office and occasionally call our Master Gardener hotline, much of the time when it comes to a soil problem they may be having, such as compaction, maybe they have a nutrient issue, maybe they have just an overall poor performance of the soil, we tend to recommend an organic matter because organic matter can just provide so many benefits to the soil and allow for the soil to be all it can be, if you will. There are two general types of organic matters. This includes animal products, manure, fish emulsion, blood meal, feather meal. You will find that some of these animal products have a very good soil nutrient content and may provide your seasonal nutrient content as well. The benefit here is you could get the best of both of these. You could add an organic matter and it would break down to the soil like blood meal. And then the blood meal could potentially address your soil nutrient needs and provide nutrients for your plants. There are plant products such as compost, mulches, and cover crops. Mulches, of course, or rather compost, can include sometimes animal products as well. I'm aware of that. For perennial plants, mulches, manures, compost, leaf litter, those tend to be the best organic matters to use in each situation. Yet again, we'll talk more about these as we go along today. For your annual organic matters, mulches, manure, compost, cover crops, and leaf litter. Really, the difference here is I'm adding cover crops. Cover crops are those that would benefit an annual growing system much more than a perennial system. And this is not perfect. I think every situation is a little bit different when it comes to it. And you may find that it is that depending on what you have and what you have access to. I get this question a lot. Folks are always curious if they are adding the right organic matter or if they should be doing something different. They may ask, what about this leaf litter? What about these grass clippings? What about worm castings versus compost? What are some differences there? What I tend to say is that it must be decided by you. That's really what the best organic matter is. A lot of times, the best organic matter is one that's based on access, what you have access to that season. Perhaps you have a farmer friend who has aged manure this past year, and he can provide you some manure for your soil situation. Maybe you have cut down a tree, you now have all this extra mulch that could easily be another good organic matter to be added to the system. Factor in budget, of course. Look at your management, your equipment, and also think about your soil physical properties. If you had compaction problems, you may find that it's going to be much better to use a compost or an aged manure rather than use a straw layer or leaf litter that may block out some of the water and may block out some of the air exchange. So by using leaf litter or using a leaf mulch, you may find that that is actually making the compaction problem worse. But it's a balance thing. Most tend to have very similar quality. As I've shared with you today, this is a very long game. The organic matter that you added in 2018 is still breaking down and will still keep breaking down if things are going as planned. It's a very long game situation. Let's discuss some of these different organic matters. Manure, influenced by the source, the age, the storage, the bedding material. In most cases, we are recommending a compost and an aged manure. So this is something where it has been allowed to kind of lay out, be exposed to the elements, and become a bit more stable. This is something that's applied a month before planting. The bags of manure that you receive or purchase from a home and garden center are those that have been composted and aged. So it is not raw manure in this situation. These have been highly regulated and highly made sure that they work fine. Raw manure, this is typically applied in the fall if you have access to it. It can acidify the soil over time. In most cases for fruits and vegetables, we are okay with this acidity level and impact. You will find manure problems frequently. This can include weed seeds for certain manures that you may be using. Occasionally, bacteria and E. coli can be a problem, although this is more common in raw manure, which is why we recommend a fall application of it. You may still find that even if it's a composted or aged manure, that it may damage the plants because it may just have some properties in it that may actually damage them and burn them a little bit. We see that more frequently with raw manure, but still be cautious. It could happen a little bit with composted or aged manure too. In comparing both of these, a fresh manure has a higher nitrogen content, but it does lose nitrogen to the atmosphere. It can, of course, acidify soil over time with organic acids. You may find it releases various chemical compounds to the soil, and there can, of course, be weed seed problems. If it's been composted correctly, and it's reaching that 160 Fahrenheit temperature, or it's been dried, it will tend to contribute more to the organic matter because products have been broken down. It tends to be more stable. Most weed seeds and pathogens have been killed if we have gotten to that right soil composted temperature. It also is less likely to lead to a nutrient imbalance in most cases. We could spend a couple of hours talking about compost, and yet I just want to mention it briefly here so you have a better understanding of the product. It's a very good soil amendment, but it may not be the best for soil fertility. The reason for this is it has a very low nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And this is released over 3 years or more time. It means that of the nitrogen measurement, it is a 0.30 nitrogen. And only 30% of that is released in year 1, 30% in year 2, and 30% in year 3. I tend to think of it more as microbial feed. And yet again, a great amendment, that can help address your soil problems that you may be encountering. Worm castings, also called vermicasts, it has a very neutral pH. It also has a very low NPK. You will see bags of the vermicast and the worm castings pretty regularly. I currently have my own worm casting bin, and I've been raising worms for the last couple of years, and I utilize it some in what I grow. I created this chart to show you the comparison of NPK values of fertilizers as well as those organic matters that do have fertility in them, but sometimes are very low. You see this across the top with NP and K, and then the availability of those products is there too. If it is slow, it means that all of the NPK values should be released and available for plants to uptake in close to 3 to 4 years, versus rapid, where you may see this in a couple of weeks or much quicker. You see Miracle-Gro. This one is 24, 8, and 16. Its availability is rapid. When you compare that to, say, Compost, which is much, much smaller in NPK value, and it's a more slow release with it because it does depend on that soil biology. Poultry manure would be a great organic matter. It also would have an NPK value with it as well, and it would be available kind of rapidly within that season. A medium availability tends to mean that we're talking about something that you may see more than half of that released in that growing season. So recognize that. I think that's very important to look at, is that sometimes these will be in the right chemical formula and be able to be taken up by the plant during that season and in a short window of time, versus those that may take some time to actually get that NPK value released. And many of these can give you both. You see dried blood meal is a great NPK value, a 12, 1.5, 0.5, and this availability is rapid for that season. It will be a great organic matter to break down through the soil, and you could also get your fertility needs in most cases met too. The dried blood mentioned here does include phosphorus and potassium, although you will find that it mostly is dried blood meal as a 1200. So it tends to not have phosphorus or potassium in it. Mulching is going to be good for both annual and perennial system. You will find that the mulches then will look different. For that perennial system of wood and bark, that will be in place for years and years, and it will eventually break down. It's just not going to decompose as fast as some of the other mulches will. A straw mulch on a seasonal basis is what a lot of folks will utilize in the vegetable garden, and this would be a great contribution to adding to the soil on a seasonal basis. You may also look towards leaf litter as a great mulch, as well as even grass clippings, although be mindful if your grass is treated, because there could be some issues where those compounds break down to your vegetable garden. It will depend greatly on what you're growing as far as what mulch opportunities are out there for you. But if on an annual system, I would look towards ones that can be incorporated in after that season. What about diversity? Should you look towards diversity in your mulching system? I would encourage that, just because it will be something that will break down into the soil. It could be that the previous season you use straw mulch around the base of your vegetables, and maybe this season, because you have access to leaf litter, your leaf litter may be the mulch that you choose to use this season as well. So having diversity in mulch, it can be pretty nice here too. If you do have that stable kind of bark mulch around your plants, you do want to think about pulling it back a little bit this spring and potentially put some compost just around the base of the plants, because those are just two different organic matters, and you may get some great benefits out of that situation. Crop rotation is a key part of the annual vegetable system. This is something where we see a lot of, especially in vegetables. However, you might even look at others for this as well. If you are planting annual flowers or other annual plants, you could do some crop rotation. And you may find some good benefits to your soil in that situation too. From a vegetable point of view, we're trying to do rotations that can address soil, rather we're trying to address those fungal diseases. So ideally, we're trying to not return back to that bed for at least 3 years. That's giving it a break to address it. However, that change in root systems is also allowing for good soil biological communities to develop too. The basic rotation then is different family members, and you can see here what I've done in this chart, that wherever I was planting my tomato, my corn, my beans, my squash, I'm rotating them for the next couple of years. There is a concern sometimes where folks are like, well, I don't feel like I have the ability to rotate. And yet I will share with you from a soil biological approach, even rotating 1 foot over will have some really good benefits. You may not necessarily see that, but from a soil perspective, that movement and that change can have a lot of great benefits to it. So it can address nutrient cycling, and that's where we see commonly where people will grow corn followed by beans, because beans are fixing nitrogen from the atmosphere into the soil. It can help a lot with disease management and really help a lot with soil biology. When it comes to maintaining the soil health, crop rotation can address the biological properties, and it can also address those chemical properties too. Perhaps it might address those physical properties. I want to talk about cover crops from a backyard perspective. What I have started to encounter as I have taught master gardener trainings and worked a lot with homeowners and backyard growers, many of them are looking at cover crops to see if there's an opportunity for them to fit into their vegetable garden. I think many of these cover crops can work, and yet I still want to be a little bit cautious of those and those that you might be growing this season. So this is meant to provide you just a short introduction as to what cover crops are and what they're grown. Typically, it's a legume, a non-legume, or a brassica. Non-legumes are grasses. And these are cover crops that are grown typically before the season or after the season. So for a lot of our corn, soybean growers, they will plant cereal rye or wheat in the fall. Rye, wheat, then overwinters into the spring. And then from there, they're managing that cover crop before they actually put their main crop in. From a vegetable perspective, what this may mean is that you could be growing a cover crop this season that will give great soil benefits, but could also be helping to address other vegetable needs. You could be growing a cover crop that has a great flowering quality to it that could then be attracting pollinators, while also helping with weed management in your vegetable garden. Cover crops get broken down into 2 categories. We have cool and warm season. Today, we're going to talk mostly about the warm season side of it. Each has different benefits, and plan these with your vegetables in mind or your other crops in mind that you're going to grow. We tend to see the full effectiveness is tied with maturity, meaning that I need to get my cover crop to flower and then decide what I want to do with it. In essence, this cover crop is also growing your own organic matter. So instead of bringing in compost or manure, you're growing a cover crop that will break down to the soil above ground, but its root system will also break down into the soil. So you're adding 2 organic matters in that season instead of using compost or manure. The added benefit is that maybe it's doing something else for your soil too. The photo you see here is tillage radish or daikon radish. We grew this in one of our raised beds at the extension office in the Rockford office. Tillage radish, this was planted mid-August, and this photo was taken mid-September. It's a cover crop that is grown to address soil compaction. So you scatter the seeds, it grows, it thrives. It's meant to address compaction problems, and then it will tend to be winter killed and start breaking down into the soil. So that later on in my springtime and in my summer, I can go into this bed and I can actually plant within it. So about these warm season cover crops, because I think that's where a lot of folks are currently thinking when it comes to potentially planting a cover crop. Most will winter kill. They will be hit very hard when it comes to the first frost in our area in the fall. These may be planted mid-May to June, They could be a good no-till option for fall crops. So maybe you put a cover crop in late May, and then you'll be growing a new crop like broccoli or cabbage in the fall too. Some of them will flower and have great attraction for pollinators, but you may find it's not always the right time. A couple of these cover crops do require you to do multiple cuttings, meaning that you might come in with some big shears or a weed eater and kind of cut it down and allow it to come back again, so you can get a lot of organic matter. They also may need to be managed. When you're growing a cover crop, you are keeping that cover crop in place and you want it to break down into the soil. So you actually don't want to, say, cut it and remove it. You actually want to use that good biomass and break it down and have it be broken down to the soil. The photo you see here is sorghum Sudan grass. It's a very tall cover crop, and I do not recommend it on a homeowner scale. It's too big. I think it does not work well on a small scale. Mention a couple examples for you. This is cowpea. This is in this photo here. So great flowering quality to it. I tend to grow it when I am planting my squash family, because as my squash is flowering and developing, the cowpea can do pretty good when it comes to attracting pollinators for my squash family members. It's a very quick cover crop and goes to seed really fast. I apologize, this is not cowpea, this is actually buckwheat. So buckwheat is the photo that you see here. And I grow buckwheat with my squash. It's a very short season cover crop, and it will flower and begin to go to seed sometimes between 50 and 60 days. And it's very important to cut it before it goes to seed, or as I share with a lot of folks, you will be a buckwheat farmer for quite some time. Cowpea is not shown. It is leguminous, so it brings nitrogen from the atmosphere, puts it into the soil and into that nutrient cycle for my plants to uptake. Vetch is one recommended for weed control, although it can get invasive, so be mindful that it could take over parts of your garden. Sunflowers are also a cover crop, and these could be ones that you could grow during the summertime and potentially get some really good benefits to your soil too. There are a lot of factors that come into choosing a cover crop. This can be determining your soil needs based on a soil test. This could be determining different cover crop features, which I do recommend you being very aware of and knowing. Also your spacing requirements and knowing how it will be seeded. But the one that I want to focus on is the exit strategy. How are you going to address managing this cover crop and killing it so that you could plant your warm season vegetables or your fall season vegetables? This could be done by hand, where you're coming in with a weed eater and you're cutting it and leaving it on the soil surface to further break down. You may have your own mechanized machinery to also utilize to kind of address breaking down that cover crop and killing it. It could be a green manure where you till it under the soil and it breaks down in that capacity. In most cases, a winter kill cover crop is a great option. You grow it during certain time of the year, usually before that first frost, and then it will be winter killed and will then break down into the rest of that winter season. Tillage radish is winter kill. It gets hit really hard with that first frost, and then it breaks down further. So you may not be at a state just yet to decide on a cover crop, but in the next couple of months, you may find that there are some cover crops out there that could address some of your soil needs. And I just use this time to really encourage you to look more, do more research, but certainly know what that exit strategy is. What about growing beyond the soil? And what I mean here is something like a raised bed or a container. Perhaps you're in a community garden, perhaps you are creating a raised bed this season, or maybe you do a lot of work in growing in containers. This is one of my beds at my house that I've got established. What we see a lot is the challenges can be drainage. Both of these situations, water drains very fast from these situations. You also have a limited soil biology. You do have a lot of soil biology, but it's not going to be near as much as you have in the actual soil if you were growing in that soil. You may also find that temperature can play a role, where you may run into that the soil that you're growing in a raised bed or a container is staying too warm or it's too cold at certain times. You may also find that rotation can be a challenge as well when it comes to growing it in it. In most cases, you're thinking then about a yearly organic matter. This could be compost, it could be worm castings, this could be aged manure to add to that raised bed or container. If you had been growing in raised beds and containers for years, your strategy every year then would be adding organic matter and wanting to add more to it to address it. Leaves and other plant material could also be a great addition to a raised bed or container. The caution here is that they may not break down as fast as they would if you were growing in the soil. With that, you may want to kind of steer more towards a compost, a worm casting, or an aged manure product to do. You may also not need a soil test. It depends on your growing situation, how many years you might have been growing in that area, but you may find you don't need a soil test as frequently or as much as we tend to see if growing in the soil. But I recognize the challenges. I am about to face some of those challenges as well with a raised bed that I have established and I'm starting to grow in this season. So I may have more information for you in a year or two. Our last part today is going to get into soil tests. How to take a soil test, how to read the soil test, what are some other soil tests out there that you might look at completing and doing. One of the places that I start when it comes to understanding the physical properties of my soil is the Web Soil Survey. This is a website that allows me to enter in my home address, and it allows me to get images and information regarding the physical properties and potentially the physical limitations of where I may be growing. This information is not always updated frequently, and if you are in, say, a subdivision that has been established in the last 10 to 15 years, you may not find this information is as updated or as relevant as it should be. If you're in an area growing in an area that's been established for a while, this information might be pretty important for you to know. And this is a free website, the Web Soil Survey. You can Google that and you will find this website. And this can be utilized to help you understand more about the physical properties. So the first step in soil fertility is going to be the soil test. I tend to recommend every 3 to 5 years within the same season. I do not think you need to soil test every year. You may not find as much differences between years if doing it every year. What you may find, though, is that if you are managing things and putting a lot of effort into your soil, this could be something to do every year. Yet, if you're just kind of approaching soil for the first time this season, I look towards every 3 to 5 years and get the same season. You get the same season because you want a consistent standard. If you were to get a soil test in the spring and compare that with the same soil test in the fall, the information may be a little bit inaccurate. It may not give you the whole picture. When it comes to the information that we need, the soil pH, the soil organic matter, and many of the soil nutrients, you are going to get this from a standard soil test. It's going to give you that information. The price for a standard soil test is between $15 to $20. There are additional tests that you can do which may increase that amount, but a standard one will give you the pH, the soil organic matter, and the nutrients. Typically, the results are back in 2 weeks via email, or they may send this information to you through the mail. As mentioned, it gives you a baseline to work with. I suggest combining these results with what you know about your soil. What are you observing? How are your plants growing? How are they reacting? Another question I get is, how many samples should I send? In most cases, one sample is about 10,000 square feet to about 1/4 of an acre in size. So factor that in with your growing area, and that can give you a greater understanding of how many samples you might need to send off or how few. So let me use myself as an example. I recently purchased a house, and this is an aerial photo of what this house looks like. I am looking to get a soil test done for the area in the blue square. Now, you can already see that there is a very faint circle where previously there was a pool. Potentially, there's going to be compaction issues right there. I can already kind of tell that. The other thing with my property is I have a raised bed, which you see here on the left, and then I have a row of pine trees on the right, which is what is in that photo, all of the pine needles. When it comes to soil tests that I might be doing, I would potentially be sending in 3 different samples because these 3 different areas are entirely different. One is influenced greatly by the pine trees adding the acidic pine needles to the soil. The other is a raised bed situation, and it is an established raised bed for quite some years, versus the final one, which you see in this square, the blue square, is growing within the soil in this situation. So I would not combine those results because the results would not be very conclusive. They wouldn't give me the accurate information that I really need to know to order to manage them. Keep this in mind. I think that that's what I run into is that when I look at my backyard perspective, I've got potentially 3 different soil tests that I could send off and do. Now, am I going to do 3 different soil tests sent off? I'm not, at least not this year. So let's take that square and let's talk about how you will then do a soil test. In this growing area, in this square, I'm going to take 9 samples, and I'm then going to compile that into 1 sample to send to the soil testing lab. And you see kind of a zigzag design here. Each blue star is representing a place where I would then take a soil sample. And I would only go down to about 0.6 inches within this. I could purchase a soil probe. You could also do fine and just use a shovel and go down to that 6 inches. I bring out a bucket, and at each blue star, I go 6 inches with soil. I place it into my bucket. I go to the next star, another 6 inches, I put into my bucket, so forth and so forth in this particular growing area. And these will all compile into 1 sample to send to the soil testing lab. So I have my blue bucket. It's full of 9 different samples. I am going to put my hand in there or a shovel and mix it up, remove any of that kind of loose grass that might be in there as well. And then from there, I am going to take about a half cup of soil into a bag. And this is one of the bags that numerous soil testing labs will provide if you reach out to them. So as much as I may have, say, a gallon of soil, or I hope you don't have that much, you're only going to then deliver and send off half a cup of soil. These soil testing labs will also send a sheet. And what's very important about this information is that you need to fill it out correctly. And you'll see soil tests to be performed will be basics. You could do some additional soil tests like a routine, which measures calcium, magnesium, and other pieces to it. You could also do a complete, which would get more into those micronutrients and so forth. It's very important, depending on the sample you send in, to be very upfront with that landscape category. That is the 4th column that you see here. And you're basically telling the soil lab what you are growing. If you're growing vegetables, if you're growing turf, if you are growing shrubs, plants, anything like that, you're letting the soil test lab know what you're growing, because the recommendations that they give you are going to be based on what you told them they're going to grow. That's also why you're not mixing multiple samples. In my growing situation, I might be looking towards growing azaleas and rhododendrons in kind of that pine tree area. And that's going to be very different needs than what might be growing in my standard vegetable garden. This form will look different from soil lab to soil lab, but just know that they typically will ask for this landscape category and classification. And there's an additional sheet that allows you to to place in different numbers, which represent these vegetables or different categories. So 2 weeks later, my soil test results come back. This is a basic soil test that I took about 5 years ago in my growing area. So because it was just a basic test, they did not do any measurements on calcium, magnesium, zinc, manganese, boron, or sulfur. There are 3 things I look for here. I look for the soil pH, which you see in that first column is a 7.3. I also will look for phosphorus and potassium, just see if those levels are good or not. And then I look at soil organic matter. And you see in this photo that's 4% listed here. I've cut this sheet off a little bit, but the sheet will also give me fertilizer recommendations. So because of my phosphorus being very high, which you see there in the orange, and my potassium being very low, they're going to encourage me to utilize a fertilizer that has very low phosphorus or no phosphorus, and potentially a little bit higher potassium with it as well. But this is why you're stating what you're going to grow, because if I sent in a sample and it was related to turf grass, I may get a very different summary and fertilizer recommendation compared to if I was sending the sample in for vegetables and the vegetable recommendation is like this. Some other questions I get when you get a soil test back. Nitrogen is not listed. So you saw on that previous slide that they did measure phosphorus, they did measure potassium, but they did not measure nitrogen. The reason for this is that nitrogen tends to fluctuate quite a bit in the soil. While it is stable, tends to be pretty closed, it can fluctuate quite a bit from season to season. And the recommendation for nitrogen is based on the soil organic matter. Whatever your soil organic matter is listed as is then what they will determine what your nitrogen needs are, along with what you're going to be growing. Why would you test the same season? Yet again, a pretty consistent standard is what you're after here. How accurate is that soil organic matter? As you've heard today, organic matter is changing, organic matter is breaking down. It takes a long time to add organic matter. It's fairly accurate, but it doesn't always tell that whole story. You will occasionally see CEC, or cation exchange capacity. It's the ability for the soil particles to hold certain nutrients. At this stage, especially as you're just starting to approach understanding your soil more, I would not worry too much about this CEC. It can be something that long-term may limit you, but at this stage, I wouldn't be too concerned with it. The previous soil test is something that you would purchase and you would send off for, and I will have resources for you today with some contacts of where to purchase these. But I want to mention what are maybe some other soil tests that you could be doing. Maryland NRCS has this great soil quality assessment. When it comes to thinking more about your soil health and how your soil performs, there are certain things that you could look for in your soil to help you see if you're doing things right, if things are going well for you, and just what are those other observations to do. I like to do this a lot when it comes to my growing area. I like to put my hands in the soil. I like to look for observations to help me see how my soil is performing. These 5 categories here are ones that you could do this season. Look for earthworms, see if you're finding shovelfuls of them, if you're seeing kind of the holes and the casts of them as they're moving. If you have 10 or more in a top foot of soil, that says you have very good soil health and good soil quality. What about organic matter color? The topsoil is clearly defined. It's kind of darker than the subsoil. Topsoil being that 0 to 4 inches or so. You might look for organic matter roots and residue. So roots and residues that are just breaking down over time. Maybe it was something that you added the previous season, or gosh, maybe even saw something for the previous season that's being broken down. You could also see subsurface compaction, where you take a flag, kind of one of those red or orange flags, and kind of barely push it down. And if the flag is able to go with fingers to twice the depth of your fingers, that can show you that you have you don't have compaction problems. The soil tilth measurement that they recommend, spongy when you walk, I tend to still scratch my head about how this can be, and yet you may find this as well. You're walking around, things feel a little bit spongy. Maybe it means you have good soil tilth. One of the other tests that we do is the underwear test. And we have planted underwear in our raised beds in the extension offices in Rockford the last couple of years. This is a test of measuring soil biology. While you are not going to be able to actually break down how much microbial communities were on the underwear, this can be something that could at least tell you that biological communities are active. And this is an underwear test with men's white cotton briefs. You're purchasing a bag of new men's white cotton briefs, and you are burying a single underwear in that 0 to 6 inches. You're wanting to make sure it's completely covered. This is around early spring, summer. You want warm soil, you still want warm weather in order to have this underwear be eaten. Because the underwear is acting as a carbon source for the microbial communities to eat. What you should find is that the band should be all that's left in place. I have done this a couple of summers, and usually we plant around the 1st of August, and then we tend to unbury it around the end of September. Within that 2-month period of time, I can dig up a pair of underwear and it will just be eaten and eaten and eaten. I know that's not a fair description to suggest, but it can just be almost a band is what you see that's left here. This could be a great project for your summer. I teach this a lot, and I tend to not have as many folks send me their results back, but it is something that a lot of folks are looking at and doing. It could be a fun project. We have planted underwear in raised beds, which you see here. I have also planted underwear in some of our 5-gallon buckets that we grow vegetables in, and seen stark contrast with both of them. The one that was in kind of a raised bed that had been established for 6 to 8 years was eaten more than the underwear that was in a newly established container that spring. So there's some interesting things with this, and there's a resource today I'll give you that you can look more into this if you want to have your own underwear experiment. So some seasonal approaches, vegetables, annuals. I think you need to look towards crop rotation, factor in organic matter, look towards mulches if it makes sense for your growing situation. Even think about some minimal tilling. What are some things that you could do to kind of not do as much tilling where you're growing? Roots left in place. This is kind of where a lot of it's starting to move, is to actually leave the roots in place of the vegetables that you're growing. I would still recommend combining that with crop rotation, but the idea with the roots in place is that they will break down into the summer or rather into the winter time, and they will be a great organic matter addition. It would potentially just mean you're only disturbing the soil once in a growing season, which could also have a great benefit there too. For perennial vegetables and fruit, look towards mulches. This may make a lot of sense for small fruits, but you may not find that it makes much sense for something like fruit trees, where the mulch around the fruit trees may actually encourage pests and other issues around it. Organic matters underneath the mulch, I would certainly encourage, whether it's a wood mulch situation or a plastic mulch situation. And yet again, fertilize as needed, kind of based on what you're seeing and what you are observing. If you're looking for a soil testing lab to actually send off and get a kit for soil test, you will see it on our soil testing lab website, which is listed here. There is also a great soil sampling and testing resource from Purdue that kind of goes into some of the basics that I mentioned with you previously today, as far as how to soil test and how to read a soil test too. Pennsylvania State just released a great resource last fall on soil health and raised beds. As I tend to do a lot of work in soil biology and soil organic matter, there was this great resource from Andrew McGuire that gets into some of what the newer practices may be when it comes to addressing your soil management. And you will find that resource there. We are very active on the University of Illinois Extension's YouTube channel, and we have a number of horticulture educators that have created some very great resources as far as videos, blogs, and posts. One of these is by Chris Enroth called Most Gardeners Don't Do This, But They Should. And this is based on soil tests and taking a soil sample in the backyard. So that's a great video you can view to kind of get at the heart of what we talked about today. NRCS Oregon has more information on the soil underwear test. Look towards that resource to see some really interesting videos and photos of this underwear test. My team of small farms, we have 2 resources and YouTube videos, Soil Organic Matters and Healthy Soils Produce Healthy Plants. Both of these webinars were released in the last 2 years, and they cover 2 different topics related to soil. I am starting to wrap up today, so please go ahead and put some questions in the chat box, and I will answer them at the end. As we wrap up today, I always encourage you to get tests if unsure of an area. I am having to do that with a new house that I've purchased. There's too many questions as far as what the soil is like in these different areas. And depending on what I'm going to grow, I need to have a greater understanding of what my limitations might be. In addition, there's 2 peach trees that are waiting to be planted, and they're going to have to wait just a little bit longer to get a better soil test back. Look to address problems early on, and also look from that long-term focus. Add organic matter diversity. That's where I really encourage a lot of folks to think about more, is that if compost was added the previous season, maybe you actually do an aged manure this year. Recognize if you need a fertilizer or not. If it's an annual vegetable situation and you don't have that soil test that you've taken this season or last year, you're going to need a fertilizer in most cases, versus a perennial plant where you may not need one. Plant your underwear. I think that would be a great project to do this season, especially later on this year if you're kind of curious about some of the soil biological communities and maybe what their activity is. Yes, it is mostly just observant and anecdotal, and yet it is something that I think people really get a better understanding of the biological communities out of. So this is my email, and this is my Facebook. We're doing a lot of webinar series as we go along today, rather than the next couple of weeks. We also have a lot of activity on our University of Illinois Extension's Northwest Illinois Local Foods. I also just got a new phone number, so you are able to call me, and my phone number is listed there. I'm more than happy to answer some of your questions you might have. And as I shared with you, we will have this YouTube presentation recorded and uploaded for use. You will also get a short evaluation, and we would appreciate you answering that evaluation too. Be on the lookout for more webinars from myself in the Get Growing webinar series, but also from other horticulture and local foods educators out there. We're doing a lot of these webinar series, and we have tried to manage them on different days. So with that, I'm going to open the chat box, and we are going to answer some questions. All right. Okay, so one of the first questions we got was, Andy asked, are the leaves composed more of starch, sugars, or lignins and waxes? The leaves for most trees tend to be more of a lignin side to it. You will find that they may have a little bit of starch, but they're not going to have near as much of kind of those sugars and waxes as you see with manure and compost. Waxes may be a lot within your leaves too. I also understand that when it comes to different leaves you may be using, if you lay them out for a period of time, they can also break down a little bit quicker than compared to if you put them on your vegetable garden. So you could actually help speed that process up by laying them out and also potentially shade them or shred them up a bit more. Andy asks, how often do you apply basic 10-10-10 during the growing season? It's going to get back to what that fertilizer is. In most cases, that 10-10-10, it may be once a month is what I tend to notice on that. but yet again, it could vary considerably on that fertilizer in the fertilizer's rate. Um, because it is so balanced, I do think it's more of a monthly one. I don't currently have one with me to kind of look on the back. Can feather meal be used with vegetables? I've heard a concern about salmonella contamination on it. My understanding is feather meal can be used based on the process that has been done to render it, as well as the treatment that has gone through. The feather meal should be a stable product to be used. I don't think you're going to run into any concern with it in that situation. Please keep in mind, I'm talking about actually purchasing feather meal in a bag versus if you might be actually getting feather meal from some other connection you might have. You shouldn't see any issue with it though. Can we do our own pH testing? A great question, James. You will see those pH testing kits at most home and garden centers. I think that they can have a place within understanding your soil, but I would still recommend kind of getting a baseline pH test from a soil testing lab. They have much better equipment for getting that test done. They're able to run multiple samples for you. If you then had that done from a soil testing lab, I think you could combine it with that in-person kind of locally based soil pH test kits that you find at home and garden centers. So using both of those could be a way to move forward. And that could help you to see what the differences might be. If it's just a 0.3 or a 0.5 difference. But I still encourage a soil testing lab, at least for that first soil pH test. Would you use leaf litter mulch for raspberries? I think that would be a fine option of the leaf litter mulch. It would certainly help benefit the soil biology because it would break down much faster than your standard wood mulch will. I wouldn't see any issue where it could be necessarily a problem for it. So I would think that'd be a fine option. And in that situation, the leaf litter mulch could provide my organic matter on a pretty well basis. My soil pH is right at 7, but I'd like to make my rhododendrons a bit happier. Do I buy elemental sulfur at big box stores? Yes, so that could be something that you purchase. I don't work as much with some of the flowers, so it could be that you may have to kind of adapt it based on when they will be producing and growing. So that might be what you have to do, Lori Walsh, is to purchase it. I'd like to hear your thoughts on Milorganite and similar fertilizers. I think there's one from the Chicago systems too. This is a great question. We get the question about Milorganite, which is a fertilizer that has gone through, connected with some of the sewer systems and processing facilities in the Milwaukee area, and now we're seeing it in Chicago and other Illinois locations too. This is a very good product. It's gone through a lot of processes to render and to address any problems that could happen with it. So it's a very good, stable product that people like and people use. We don't see any issues related to it. It's highly regulated. It's gone through a number of different testing, and you also will see some resources that will discuss it and talk about how to use it. Can you add too much compost? This is a great question, James. There's potential that you could, and I think what happens is that sometimes we're adding compost every year, and I think you need to think about adding a little bit more diversity. So it could be that you're adding leaf litter one year compared to that compost, because you can find that it's just breaking down at different times. So you may run into some issues. It's not going to hurt your plants, but for the overall kind of health of your soil, you may find you need to add some diversity in there, which could be leaf litter one year, which could be an aged manure, which could just be an additional one in there. But standard compost every year, you may run into some issues that leads to, potentially compaction, or just leads to just some problems with the soil. So there could be too much. I have a clay-based soil. What is best used to break it up? I would start with compost, Susan. Compost is going to be something that can help address some of those main physical properties. I would avoid some of those leaf litter organic matters for a clay-based soil because I don't think they're going to break down as fast or really contribute to the soil as much as you would like it to. So for these first couple of years, I would look towards the compost, go in that route. And then from there, you might look more towards